of Libya towards Cyrene, and
Mhm.
visitors from Rome. Oh, not only Yehudim, Jews, and newcomers, Cretans and Arabs, listening to them speak in their own tongue the magnificent things and the powerful works of God. So it's curious here as to whether they're trying to say that everyone is speaking their normal language, but that um, the ones that are there hearing them hear it in their own native tongue. So it's the ears of the recipients, not the mouths of the speakers. Or is it the mouths of the speakers and the ears of the, and not the ears of the recipients? It wouldn't make any sense, actually, for everyone to hear them in their native tongue unless the people were simultaneously speaking in 20 different languages, which would be, of course, impossible. And if they're only speaking in one language, then what was the Holy Spirit doing? Because they're only speaking in their one language. And now they're claiming that the Holy Spirit undid what Yahweh did with Babel, where he confused the tongues of men such that now it doesn't matter what language you speak, we all hear it the same. So it's a mess that they have created here. But as we continue with this, and gentlemen, I understand that we are broadcasting, and
Uh-huh.
over my right shoulder here, I can see both of your handsome faces. So I know that you're able to hear this. I unfortunately can't hear you. Hello, Kirk. Uh, so one can only speculate as to how it would have been possible for so many magnificent and powerful works of their Theos, God, to have been conveyed in so many different languages without a single one of the inspired speakers even bothering to document the momentous occasion. So how can you have all of this wonderful stuff that was supposed to be conveyed about the glorious things that the Theos had done, and there isn't a mention of a single word? That reeks of fraud, of course. And yet, that is the reality of this situation. Like so many of what's found in the Christian New Testament, there is absolutely nothing to corroborate the alleged birth of the Christian religion, apart from incredulous hearsay, specimens of this ilk. And even then, this was written 4 decades, 5 decades later, in a language that was not even included among the 17 that were listed, and by the man who wasn't among the jibber jabbers. If even if we were to play along, these were inconsequential expressions, not powerful works of God. Further, this goes against what Yahweh did in Babel. Why would the Almighty do an about face and facilitate what he had
Yeah.
deliberately confounded? So, while it would have been impossible, even for a multilingual witness, to know if this had occurred, the overall point was implausible, especially with the pretense of authenticity inherent in the details. Among the most glaring issues, the Romans were not visitors, and Yehudim were listed twice, while their language, Hebrew, was not mentioned once. Those from Mesopotamia would have
Mhm.
spoken Aramaic, a language which was very similar to Hebrew, making uh, Parthians, Medes, and Elamites verbose, while the absence of the Persians was a significant slight. Arabs, in this case, speak a corrupted form of Hebrew. Similarly,
Mhm.
insignificant places like Cappadocia, Pontus, Phlegra, Pamphylia, and Cyrene were listed, while the people responsible for the lingua franca of this region and of the emerging religion, the Greeks, were not. So, why do billions of people believe such verbal diarrhea? That's a lot of mistakes for a short list, especially when it was conceived to infer that there was a miracle afoot. What's good is being able to speak many languages, even when everything being conveyed is obviously a lie. These Christians have reconstituted the very problem Yahweh sought to resolve 4.5 millennia prior in Babel. Now, had this been written, the disciples, in addition to their native Hebrew, now spoke Greek, Latin, and Aramaic, and had it been attributed somehow to the Shabbat harvest 2 millennia hence, while not believable or valuable, it wouldn't have been so obviously fraudulent. One would have been hard-pressed to find anyone in Jerusalem who was not conversant in one or more of these languages, making them useful among supposed fishermen. In this passage, the Greek word proselyust is transliterated in most English Bibles as proselytes. Then those who aided and abetted this misleading transliteration erroneously defined that word as converts to Judaism, and thereby misconstrued the intent of Shabbat. This day neither marked the birth of the church nor the transition from Judaism to Christianity, as Catholics and Protestants profess. Equally relevant, Jews did not and do not proselytize. Paul's rants against Judaizers were therefore delusional and likely the result of his personal paranoia. Now, addressing the lack of sanity inherent in Luke's hearsay reconstitution of this day, the beneficiaries of Shabbat, should this have been a premature fulfillment, would not have been just few and far between, because it's literally 1 in a million that will avail themselves of this kind of harvest, according to the second statement that Yah etched on the first tablet. They would have gone as and out of this world. Therefore, the supposed disciples could not have stuck around as participants. Further, since Luke's fanciful portrayal of Peter's narrative relative to these non-events fails to mention Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim, which are solely responsible for the Shabbat harvest, everything that follows is ignorant, irrational, and invalid. Now, while most anyone can attend the party, there are some baseline requirements for benefiting from Shabbat. These include knowing and using Yahweh's name, along with the familiarity with and acceptance of his Torah guidance, which is where the Mikre are explained. Excuse me, the beneficiaries will all be covenant members who have walked away from religious influences, affirming that they could not have been starting a new religion on this day or on any moed. They will be en route to Yahweh when this is fulfilled. And for this to occur, each will have accepted the 5 conditions of the covenant and will have benefited from the first 3 moed mikre. Everyone will be circumcised too, none of which is mentioned because this religious charade was being presented as misleading. In fact, Paul actually wrote, if you're circumcised, that his Christ can't avail you. And that being the case, then there is no access to eternal life, because the only means to eternal life is through Passover. Sporadically and sparingly, to the great chagrin of the religion claiming to have been born this day, the message of the Torah and Nambi has been conveyed to those willing to listen by spirit-filled men and women who are cognizant of the conditions and benefits of the Bereth and Mikra. As a result, Yahweh's family is inclusive of the people from, different races and places. Everyone is welcome so long as they come via the Torah through the Moed Mikra and accept the terms of the covenant. All arrive the same way. We have to embrace what Yahweh is offering and accepting in return. what he is requesting, we must know and acknowledge. Now, those who have capitalized upon what the Mashiach Dode has done for us on Pesach and Matzah, leading through Bakurim to facilitate and make possible Shabuah, this Qatsyr harvest, are all Torah observant. They're Torah affirming, while Christians are not. We know that the 7 Shabbats is an annual party where those who are related to Yah invite their friends to celebrate the good news. A path home has been laid out at great cost. It's toll paid by the Zeroah so that we might journey free of encumbrances. This is the day of growth, of enrichment, where we enter Yahweh's presence. It is for all people, all places, and all time. And like all things, however, that pertain to the Moed Mikre, it is being sponsored by the House of Yisrael. Gentlemen, it just dawned on me that, today was a really dark day for the United States. I don't know if you saw the press conference of Zelensky and Donald Trump, but they would have done well to have this same audio glitch that we're having right now. And neither one of you witnessed it. Probably good for you. Maybe many of our listeners have. It was a place where, had there been no audio feed, everyone would have been better served. It's a really sad day when we have a president of the United States and a visiting dignitary, president of a country that has squandered, well, I think it's now $200 billion from the United States, $250 billion from Europe, another $50 billion elsewhere, has been squandered in this war. And best count is 1.2 million people have been killed or tragically wounded. Carnage has been egregious, and it's a proxy war that is basically the Cuban Missile Crisis played by idiots. And when we realize that it's a proxy war, that the United States, particularly John McCain and Lindsey Graham, George W. Bush, and then followed through the Obama and Biden administrations, have been orchestrating for 15 years now, calling for, where there was never any chance of success. There is no scenario that plays out favorably in this war. Thus far, 1.2 million people have had their lives snuffed out or completely ruined by the degree of the casualty. And even in this day and age, $500+ billion is a lot of money to squander. Yeah. And we're nowhere. And the thing that was so sad, it was, guys like John McCain and Lindsey Graham that were old Cold War warriors that wanted to give Russia a black eye. And so they orchestrated this entire thing. And there's not only video of John McCain and Lindsey Graham telling the Ukraine 10 years before this event that their war would be our war and that we would give them whatever weapons they needed to fight Russia a decade before Russia was taunted into invading. And then we have now videos of John McCain there at the coup at the time that the elected government was overturned, which even Russia has presented U.S. State Department cables saying that we armed the opposition, we funded the opposition, we deliberately tried to overturn the pro-Russian elected government. And John McCain is there overlooking the square with his camera, videotaping it. And then after all of that, these nimrods didn't think it through. So let's say that Russia prevails in this war. Then you've squandered, by the time it's over, 1.5 million lives, 2 million lives? That's a lot of people. And then you squander, $700-800 billion, and Ukraine becomes part of Russia all over again after all of that loss. How is that beneficial? And if Russia were to lose, countries like Russia just don't, put their tail behind their legs and run away, particularly since they would have only lost because Well, the United States and Europe provided billions and billions of hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weapons, including cluster bombs and long-range missiles. So you think that Russia is just going to say, well, you got us on this one. We're going to fold up and let you just go ahead and destroy us. No, they have the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. They're going to use it. So the consequence here, you are risking the annihilation of the earth to play this stupid game. And then you lied to everybody that making Russia out to be the aggressor. Listen, I don't like Putin. Putin was, I don't know if he just showed his hand or if he was forced into it, but with all the sanctions, he was, had really very little choice but to form even a tighter alliance with China, North Korea, and Iran. And one of the unforeseen circumstances, well, I saw it, but the Nimrods that started it, mostly Republicans, but some Democrats, Trump just wasn't in on that deal because he wasn't part of the original founders of this group of Republicans. But you're looking at all of this and you're saying why? We're just risking world war, nuclear war, and there was absolutely nothing that could be gained. And the fuse was started when we said, yes, we want Ukraine to be part of NATO. That was George W. Bush. And it just went from there. And no one bothered to recognize Ukraine is the country in Europe that is the most graft-ridden. It's relied on foreign loans since its breakaway from the Soviet Union. And if it wasn't for the infighting as to who would supply those loans that would never be paid back, we wouldn't be in this situation. So it's astonishing that America can so effectively lie to most people and make it look like we're the good guys defending liberty and what's so all, and that Putin is the dictator as the aggressor. Now, as I say, you can't be a friend of Putin, because if Iran ends up with nuclear weapons, it will be because of this stupid war, because we put those two together such that Iran's not going to continue to support Russia and the Russian economy this way and militarily without a quid pro quo. And the quid pro quo would be to finish their nuclear program and give them delivery mechanisms. So I'm just astonished that we can constantly elect people term after term who will risk the world this way. But then, you have this meeting and Zelensky does the ultimate no-no with a narcissist, and there's no one that could claim that Donald Trump's not a narcissist. Whether he's a psychopath or not is open for discussion. We'll find that out later. But he's certainly a narcissist, and with a narcissist, you don't talk over him. You don't try to embarrass him. You don't tell him he's wrong. And Zelensky did all of these things. And when you're in a position like Zelensky, where if the United States backs out, there isn't enough weaponry made in Europe and enough economy there to go on defending the Ukraine and marshaling up greater and greater casualties. And so he's in a position where he's can't afford to upset the United States, and yet Trump was really disgusted by him, and it's worth seeing, because that whole episode ended very badly. And then, as I understand it, the Ukrainian delegation was actually told to leave the White House by Rubio, the Secretary of State. Wow. And the reason we talk about this kind of thing now is that something tragic is going to happen on Shabbat. The history of Shabbat is told by the prophet Yashaya, is that United States is going to be the catalyst in forcing Israel to capitulate their heartland and making Israel so vulnerable it cannot defend itself, such that large swaths of Israel are given to Muslims, which will now make it impossible for the IDF in Gaza or in this Palestinian state to be able to regulate the inflow of weapons. even on the other side in Judea and Samaria, they would not be able to go in as they can now and eliminate weapons. And so you're going to have millions, probably 4, 5, 6 million Muslims armed to the teeth. And not only coming in Israel from the east and the west and from the north, but also from inside Israel. And this is something that Donald Trump, because of his timing in office, we know he's going to be the one that plays Neville Chamberlain. And it's going to start a world war. And what we witnessed in the White House today clearly shows that he does not have the wherewithal to avoid it. He just doesn't prepare. It's like when he off the cuff told in his press conference, Netanyahu, that he was going to turn Gaza into a resort. And then when that was incredible, he doubled down on it and said, "Oh, no problem. We're going to move the Gazans out." But that's impossible. They'd rather die than move because they want to be close to Israel so that they can kill Jews. They're born to kill Jews. They're indoctrinated to kill Jews. That there's nothing else they want. They don't want to move out to the Emerald City in the Sinai. The Egyptians aren't going to take them. And if they were to take them, which they wouldn't, and you wouldn't have enough Gazans that want to move. And therefore, how do you move these people, particularly with Hamas shooting the ones that do move in the back, and the rest of them would rather be run over by a bulldozer than be pushed into the Sinai. And if they ever did that, then you'd have no way to preclude them being armed to the teeth. And now you'd have 5 million Muslim jihadists with a supply of weapons that could not be restrained. It is a recipe for disaster. And yet that's where this president went until it realized, okay, there is no way. I'm really wrong. I can't convince Egypt. I'm really wrong. I can't convince Jordan. I'm really wrong. I can't convince anybody this is a good idea because it's an insane idea. And so I just threw it out there was his last line. And we'll see what other people come up with. You can't act that way and be the president of the most powerful economy in the world and the largest military in the world. This is, what I witnessed today was insane. And it all points to how, with that level of just ignorance, how it is possible, actually, that Donald Trump could sponsor the two-state dissolution of Israel with Saudi Arabia and actually believe the idiot in Saudi Arabia that, we'll ensure Israel's right to exist, not knowing anything about Hudabayah, the nature of Islam. And he could actually be suckered into it. It's the intellect we watched in the White House today is capable of it. And I think you guys know that I don't say this because I'm a political partisan. I'm not. I'm the student of politics, as you guys are, and of history. I don't take sides, but I do report when I see things that are tragic. And this is not to say I would have preferred to have Cackles in the White House. I can't even imagine Cackles meeting with an international leader. But now that we've seen Trump do it, the mainstream media is referring to Trump becoming the laughingstock of the world. And I can tell you for certain, there isn't a head of state anywhere in the world that's laughing. When the United States acts that belligerently and is that poorly informed and treats a head of state that you have used as a proxy to fight a war with a nuclear superpower, that doesn't have anybody chuckling. So as we continue here, and gentlemen, it doesn't look like we're going to get the sound. I'm sorry that we can't hear you. But I can tell by your expressions that you can hear. So you have a ringside seat for the show, nonetheless. So that part is good. The Feast of 7 Sevens follows, of course, firstborn children on the annual calendar by 7 weeks, the pattern of 7 Shabbats plus 1 day for the special Shabbat observance of unyeasted bread, and the most essential day on our road to our redemption. As we have discovered, this opportunity to be called out and to meet on Shabbat will be fulfilled as a harvest of standing grain, which is symbolic of those who are standing alongside Yahweh, ready and willing to speak to his people on his behalf. Attendance is open to all people. It's free, and it's hard to imagine somebody getting it to this messed up. The reason for the yeast and bread is ingenious. To become part of Yahweh's family, we're all required to remove it from our lives, which is, and we do that by observing matzah, where Dod takes it into Sheol to deposit it there, which is symbolic of walking away from Mitzrayim and Babel. Mitzrayim is the day, matzah, that the children of Israel left that religious nation and the politics of it, and it is symbolized also by walking away from Babel, which is the thing that Abraham had done prior to Yahweh contacting him. So the integration of religion and politics is something that we leave on this day to be part of the covenant, and it therefore cannot have been by any stretch of the imagination. My dog's paw is on the cord for my headset here. So if you wonder why I'm pulling on it, we're having a tug of war between my ear and Asher's paw. She's a Labrador, and Labradors only want to sit right at the feet of their people. And so for those who have disassociated from mankind's controlling and corrupting influences, it makes Shabbat accessible. And yet these Nimrods want you to believe that the only way to participate, or the purpose now of Pentecost, the fake Shabbat, is to become part of their church, which is, of course, both a politicized and religious institution. So it's amazing, again, that any of this appealed to anyone. Now, upon examining the nature of this day, one comes to understand that the best way to broadcast its message and celebrate its inheritance is to host a grand party replete with a medley of foods. And, well, the foods really are beef, and that there's a bull there, a little goat, some lamb, all consistent with Yahweh's menu, and also bread, including a variety of libations, and especially this bread baked with yeast. We are to invite anyone who is interested in knowing God, although we have to be a little bit careful, because you don't want anyone become interested in this Shabbat harvest who isn't circumcised as a male, who isn't already committed to attending and properly capitalizing on Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim, and who isn't aware of and have accepted the 5 conditions of the covenant, or you'd be doing them a tremendous disservice. Now, each mikre has been designed to memorialize an important event in the life of Yisrael, and to be prophetic of even more important events in the unfolding of Yahweh's redemptive plan. They speak poignantly of Yahweh's role in the reconciliation of his people, with detail after detail pointing directly and unambiguously towards the Torah being the roadmap to the end result, which is to meet with our Creator. This pattern is also important because there are 3 more annual feasts to be realized after Shabbat, and that they take place in the autumn, in the 7th and final month of Yahweh's redemptive calendar. Each presents a strategically essential event in the reconciliation of Yisrael and Yehudah, with Teruah being the final harvest, gleaning of olives, and therefore Yisraelites, but also the Shabbat on Saturday. This would be the 24th of September of 2033. There'll be the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah, which cleanses this mortal remnant that's left behind of Yisrael in preparation for them to encounter and accept the return of Yahweh with Dod 10 days later. The spring feasts have all come to pass. The fall feasts are yet to come. And so Yahweh has given us carefully drawn prophetic word pictures to tell us the most important lessons we could possibly learn. Now, had Yehudim not been so irascible, had they listened to Yahweh and to his prophets, there would have been perhaps many thousands of witnesses and celebrants observing and appreciating the fulfillments of Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim by, father and son, which otherwise went unnoticed. This suggests a number of things, all of which are illuminating. First, the revelation that Dod is Gabriel, God's most capable and courageous man, that he offered through Daniel a timeline and a depiction of specifically what he would do as the Messiah. It was fulfilled precisely on the day and the way that Dod had explained. And he even gave us the timing of Shabbat because he provided a 7-year gap between it and which would be this time of Jacob's troubles. You see, the reason I turned to Trump earlier is that this two-state dissolution is going to occur in and around Shabbat in its fulfillment 7 years before Yahweh and Dod's return, commencing the beginning of the time of Jacob's troubles. And that was all predicted by Gabriel, who was Dod in Babylon 600 plus years before he fulfilled part of this, and 2,600 years away from the time that he will fulfill the rest of it. So they had every indication this would occur. In fact, even 1,000 years before the event, Dod wrote 2 of his Mizmor explaining exactly how he was going to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim. He discussed how the Romans were going to kill him through crucifixion many, many hundreds of years before Rome existed and crucifixion was invented. So again, there was no excuse in being able to figure this out. So this all suggests that a number of things which are illuminating. First, the revelation of Dod as Gabriel, offered through Daniel, was indeed fulfilled just as Dod had affirmed. And in the midst of serving his people, the Messiah was cut off from them. In fact, they wrote him out of their lives. It's what a tragedy for him to have offered this kind of sacrifice and his people reject him instead of embrace him. The result, there would be no additional prophetic revelation from Yahweh until he returns. Second, during the next 20 centuries, at least apart from father and son, no one would recognize the fulfillment of the first 3 Mikra, nor would they anticipate the fourth. And until we had written probably 30 some odd of these books behind me, and rewritten a number of them multiple times, and have translated most of the Torah and prophets, and then derived insights from them. Gradually, we built a base where we came to understand more and more of how God's plan was ultimately fulfilled and enabled. And this led us to the realization that Dod had indeed volunteered to serve as the Pesach El, and that he would have 3 lives, not just 2. And that by doing that, we have the opportunity not only to capitalize on eternal life and perfection and being part of Yahweh's eternal family, it makes this Shabbat harvest possible. And now you know the timing of it, since Dod fulfilled the first 3 in year 3000 Yah and told us the timing of this one. We can put all the pieces together. But, fellas, we were the first ones to do this now in 2,500 years.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't have been that difficult. It was all there. It's just amazing that no one figured it out. Most certainly didn't know when these events took place or when the rest of them will be fulfilled. Now, third, well, the Zeroah, the sacrificial lamb of God, made the sacrifices during Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim to open up the doorway to life and to enable our perfection so that we could enter through it and be welcomed into Yahweh's family and home. He was the initial beneficiary, of course, of Bikurim as the Bakor. However, since Shabuah is a Bikurim harvest by Yahweh's own definition and explanation, the seeds he has sown have taken root and are now producing fruit. Dode was the firstborn of the covenant, and he embodied and enabled this for us today. Fourth, the Torah, Nabi, and Mizmor from Yahweh. Actually, from Moshe all the way to Malachi. It's 1,000 years of prophetic revelation. The sum total of Yahweh's inspired revelation to his people. We come to know that God, our God through these 1,000 years of revelation, and we are perfected by them and receive the benefits of the covenant and of the Moed Mikre through them. So it's certainly how I came to understand and then share the testimony and resulting insights that we are considering now. But it's also how Dode did. The difference with Dode and the three of us is that Dode really had the Torah and maybe the book of Yosha. Perhaps there was a little bit of Shaphat Judges that may have been available to him, but he basically had to figure this out from the Torah and from his personal revelations from God. He was a prophet, so he did see much of the future. And he was the beneficiary of that wonderful speech in 2 Samuel, where Yahweh spoke of homes and who builds them, who lives in them, where he specifically said all of these things will happen to Dode and how he would be the one who will return and a seat of great honor. At that point of Dode's life, I don't think he could have fathomed that Yahweh would honor him in this way, because he and Yahweh weren't even on speaking terms at this point.
Yeah.
And it's because Yahweh gave Dode, who he loved, he even called him my beloved, my chosen one, he gave Dode a timeout for bad behavior. Mm-hmm. He had no issue with Dode having 7 or 8 wives. He just had an issue with the way he acquired the 8th wife, which was to send his general out on a mission that was likely to give him killed, so that his wife would be available to him, Bathsheba. So they were on a timeout at this point. And so all that Dode had to go by is what Nathan related to him, what he had seen previously as a prophet, and to read the Torah to realize something has to happen for me to be on the outs with Yahweh, to me having the seat of honor with Yahweh for all time, and to have all of the acclaim that Yahweh is affording me. And he just figured it out from reading the story of Abraham and Ishak on Mount Moriah. And I figured it out from there. He's smarter than I am. I'm sure he figured it out from there. Yeah. And from that point, he realized this is really the right thing for me to do. I can serve my God. I can redeem my reputation. I can earn everyone's respect. Mm-hmm. And I can serve my people, defending them in a way that no one ever has before. And he figured it out. He said, oh God, it's 2 horrible days. Less than 48 hours. Some 30 some odd hours. And if I do this and endure the agony for those 2 days, we're golden for all eternity. Yeah. Well, or so he would have thought. And the reason Dode becomes so frustrated in many of his Mizmor, his Psalms, is he saw that his own people rejected him. He went ahead and he knew that he was going to do this, and he knew they would reject him. And that was that is the tragedy of all this. It's why we're doing these programs, is to reacquaint Israel with not only Yahweh's name, but what his son, Dode, achieved for them. Again, gentlemen, it's I appreciate you hanging in there. You do have a good ringside seat for this program. But,
Right.
I wish it was more of a dialogue and not a monologue, particularly with the scratchy throat today. So thank you for hanging in there. It's nice to see your reaction, if nothing else. So when I look off from the camera, I'm looking to my friends. Fifth point here is that while God's testimony has been available to humankind for 3,470 years, beginning with the revelation of the Torah and then affirmed 2,700 to 3,000 years ago by Yeshaya and Daniel, depending on which of the two, or Dode, depending on which of the two text you're reading, everything these men revealed on behalf of Yahweh and Yehudim has either been ignored, misconstrued, misappropriated, all in the conception of Judaism and Christianity. And that's what we're trying to resolve. Sixth, since Shabbat exists to prepare covenant members for the Qatsyr and to be effective witnesses, and that part about being an effective witness is important because there's only 8.5 years left, and from the time of this Shabbat harvest, there's only 7 years left.
Yeah.
And I realize that both Dode and Yahweh's made it pretty clear that the two witnesses will arrive, Elia and Yada, 3.5 years before Dode's return for the great homecoming. And 3.5 years in the circumstance that they're going to be in, sitting on top of the Temple Mount, cleared of the Islamic boils that are currently there, that's going to be pretty dramatic. And the world's going to try to kill them, and they're going to be essentially bulletproof. And so a lot will be accomplished in that 3.5 years. But I think to a very significant degree, Yahweh is not likely going to want 3.5 years to go by at the beginning of the time of Jacob's troubles, the most difficult time in the history of the world for his people, and have no one there to help them.
Yeah.
So I do think that there is a significant part of this where, as Shabbat says, it is a twofold 10 times enhancement. And so it is Bokurim is a 10-time enrichment, enlightenment, empowerment, and then Shabbat 10 times more. So it's 100 times, if you will. But then Shabbat is really 10 squared. So now we're at 1,000 times more. I do think for whatever period of time that from Shabbat to the time that we are returned, at least a team of us, that Shabbat is going to be that, plug in the battery, get recharged, and such that we're ready to go. We'll even have audio then, perhaps, and be able to do this, so we can actually hear one another. Seventh,
I can hear you.
there was no reason for or benefit to the Greek misrepresentation of Shabbat. Luke's accounting of events and acts is completely inaccurate. Moreover, there was no Jesus, no Christ, no disciples, no Pentecost, no proliferation of multilingual speakers, no church at the time, or inordinate hostility by Jews toward Christians, who also didn't exist at the time. On this day, the 24th of May on the Julian calendar, 7 weeks after the fulfillment of Pesach and Matzah, leading to Bokurim in 33 CE. So while it is trivial by comparison, there is a sinister religious proclamation which may have inadvertently arisen as a result of Shabbat, one which poisons 1.5 billion souls, to share Yahweh's message of reconciliation in the language of the Arabs, in Acts 2, 8 through 11. An alphabet was required, and the Arabs in Acts to 8 through 11, had none at this time. Written Arabic, the language of the Quran, was actually created by Syrian Yehudim, Jews, who, as Ebonim, Torah observant Jews who recorded in Hebrew some of what Dode conveyed prior to the fulfillment of Chag Matzah, wanted to express what they had witnessed with their neighbors. The resulting Syriac alphabet and vocabulary derived from the same 22 letters with the same exact sound for each letter that comprised the Hebrew alphabet in the 7th century CE. Ultimately became the tool that Satan would use in his most acclaimed recital, the Quran. Of particular interest in this regard is the fact that almost all of the Quran's essential terms are actually Hebrew, with a smattering of Greek, but not Arabic. And yet Muslims the world over, unaware of the basis of their language, claim that those who do not read Paleo-Hebrew, which would include all but a few hundred people worldwide, cannot understand Allah's message. That would be untrue, because the best way to comprehend the Quran, besides reordering it chronologically and setting it in the context of Muhammad's life, as revealed in the Hadith, which is what I did for Goddamn Religion, it would be to recognize and appreciate the meaning of the Hebrew words which comprise the Quran recitals, which towards the end of the fourth and fifth books of Goddamn Religion, I decided, at this point, there's only like 5 or 6 surahs left. Why not actually begin to speak of the Hebrew connotations? For example, the word that is rendered in the Quran as is kafar, the infidel.
Yeah.
Well, kafar is based upon the Kaporath and Yom Kippurim. It means to be reconciled.
Yeah.
So the people that Allah is ranting against, that he wants to torture forever in hell and he wants to kill, are the reconciled, the very people who have benefited from Pesach, Matzah, Bakorim, Shavua, Teruah, and Yom Kippur, because he doesn't want anybody at the homecoming and family reunion on Kippurim, because if God doesn't return, he gets the earth to himself.
Yeah.
And he doesn't go off to Sheol. So, when you start understanding the words that comprise the Quran, you realize that kafar has the same meaning actually in Hebrew in Arabic than it does in Hebrew, upon which it's based, and it means to cover and to purge and to reconcile. So it's just a lot of things that are interesting like that. Even Quran is from this notion that in the first revelation, where Muhammad was in the cave wrestling with a dark spirit while performing pagan rituals, the spirit nearly killed him, according to Muhammad's testimony. He said it was so horrific, he tried to commit suicide multiple times running down the mountain, and then he told his wife, I fear for my life, I am demon possessed. And during that brief encounter, an illiterate man was told on 2 occasions to Qara, which is to read. That's how Quran got its name, is from that, even though there was nothing to read. The first written Quran wouldn't exist for 100 years after that time. It's like reading the Christian New Testament. You just scratch your head and say, how can people be stupid enough to believe this nonsense came from God? So Quran got its name from Qara, because Muhammad, as an illiterate man, was asked to read that which wouldn't be written for 100 years. He was also told that man was created from a clot of congealed blood. Of course, that the pen was responsible for the Quran, not Gabriel or Allah, and that the pen, which by the way didn't exist at the time, had written the Quran before the universe was created. So that would be back 14 billion years ago. And yet it's all focused on this brief episode in Muhammad's life, and advances his desires for pedophilia and rape and incest and the slave trade and mass murder and all of those sorts of things, and just preoccupied with this disgusting man's life. So that's really credible too, isn't it, guys?
Yeah.
So we learned that Quran is from Kara, the very word that is so essential to Jews to know, because it forms the very basis of the path we walk to reconcile our relationship with Yahweh, the Mikra, which are based upon Kara. Excuse me. The basis of Allah's claim and the foundation of Islam is the false notion that Allah, not Yahweh, was the God of Adam, Abraham, Moshe, Dod, and the prophets, even the gospel Jesus, who Allah calls Esau, which is Arabic for Esau. Allah protests that his, I guess renaming him gave Allah his jollies, because Esau is the one person God said, I hate him. And what does Dod's name mean? I love him.
Love it.
And so the imposter for Dod is named I hate him. You got to give Satan at least credit for that's kind of funny in a way. Anyway, Allah protests that his Quran confirms the Torah, the prophets, and the Injil. The Injil would be a twisted version of Evangelion, which is the Greek word for Gospels, even though there's nothing even remotely akin to gospel and Evangelion. Angelion means from agelos means message, and eu means good or beneficial. So there is nothing, and you either transliterate it as Evangelion or you call it good message. Of course, it wasn't a very good message, but nonetheless, it is not an Injil. And the moment you say that your Quran confirms the Torah and the Injil, then you are, of course, a dunderhead, because the New Testament was written to negate the Torah, and the Evangelion is a very small part and a come lately part of actually the Christian text, because the first 14 letters were written by Paul, and you wouldn't have your first Evangelion until two of Paul's associates wrote the first two Gospels as hearsay accounts about 10 years after Paul completed his last letter. Anyway, it's just everything about Allah's Quranic recital. It's just the antithesis of what Yahweh conveyed. And of course, the Gospels contradict the Torah. So Muhammad and Allah were not playing with the full deck. Muhammad, for example, as Allah's lone messenger, violated and abrogated each of the 10 statements that Yahweh etched in stone, every single one of them. Allah even said that his Quran was written in pure Arabic, and it was inscribed on tablets before the world was created, when in fact almost every word is Hebrew. And the reason that the Torah, prophets, and Gospels no longer convey the same message is that in the 7th century, Jews living in Yathrib, this date farm town in central Arabia, today's Medina, they're the ones who changed and corrupted their scriptures to foil Muhammad, because Muhammad's version, the Jews read their Talmud stories. The Talmud's doesn't match the Torah anyway, and they picked the craziest of all of the stories of the Talmud to read to him. And Muhammad didn't have a very good memory, and he was really only interested in twisting them to serve his agenda. And so, you have this notion that's plastered all over the Quran, that the reason now that the Torah and the Quran don't match is because these very Jews that recited their Talmud to him and Yathrib changed the Torah.
Yeah.
Now, they would have been busy little beavers if they had gone to the caves above Qumran. They had found that the scrolls were there. They had rewritten all of them so they would date to the 3rd and 4th century BCE, about 1,000 years earlier, and then put them all back there so that they could change them. And then they got every copy of the Masoretic text worldwide, and must have also changed those.
Yeah, they're good.
It's just
they're good.
Pure insanity, and they'll kill for this religion.
I know.
Therefore, the existence of the Dead Sea Scrolls proved that the Islamic God was lying. But more than this, it is unconscionable that the advocates of Islam, a religion which inverts and repulses, repudiates Yahweh's message, claim that the Arabic of the Quran is proof of its superiority and material to its message, when in fact the means to convey it was developed by the very people Allah had pledged to wage war against and kill, and Muhammad ordered to kill every Jew. They encouraged rape, engaged in slavery, perpetuated genocide. It just goes on and on. Now, these things had rabbis, priests, and Christian theologians not removed Yahweh's name from his Torah and prophets, Islam would have been stillborn. Even a fool would have been able to recognize that Allah is not Yahweh. Although the Quran does manage to shoot itself in the, I don't know, you can't say foot because Allah was a snake. That's the one defining things about snakes. They don't have any feet. Maybe inflict a self-inflicted bite. Can a snake envenomate themselves? I don't know if they can or not. Probably can. Well, that's what Allah did, because there are many mentions in the Quran of Jews being Yahud, and if they are Yahud, then they are beloved of Yah. And so, if they're the beloved of Yah, Allah cannot be the God of the Jews, because they're the beloved of Yahweh.
Yeah.
And it must be 20 of those admissions within the Quran, maybe 30 or 40. Anyway, there is still much we can learn from this portrayal of what happened during the premature fulfillment of 7 Shabbats, even if the primary lesson is to distrust the entirety of the Christian New Testament and to clear this rubbish away so that there's the opportunity for people to finally see and feel comfortable with the truth. It goes on to say, this is Acts 2:12. But also, all were astonished, perplexed, and puzzled, with different people saying to others, what is the purpose of this? So, if you are claiming that this was the grand fulfillment of something really important, that everybody now would recognize that this is the fulfillment of something that was long expected, how could no one understand the purpose of it?
Yeah.
Either it was never predicted and they're scratching their heads and said, what in the hell is this? Or it was predicted and there isn't anybody smart enough to have read it or make the correlation. One of the two.
Yeah.
And of course, there is something pretty interesting, and that is that Peter's claims to validate this are going to come up in a moment. And he cites the prophet Yoel to say, yep, that's what happened here. I think there's like 2 or 3 words that were consistent with his story here that he used to do that. And yet, what is the prophet Yoel talking about? The last days. And it's over and over again that he's speaking of the time that is still before us, that is going to transpire over the next 8.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't have people astonished and perplexed and puzzled saying, what is the purpose of this, if you also want to claim that this was the great fulfillment, the powerful works of God being fulfilled. You can't have it both ways. Take your pick. It's either something that just happened out of the blue with absolutely no support, which means there's no correlation between Christianity and the God of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, and the whole religion is a complete farce and a lie, which it is. Or they could not have been pious Jews if they had no clue what was happening. If this was indeed Shabuah, anybody that's familiar with the Torah would know what Shabuah represents. And it's presented as a harvest, an ingathering of standing grain. There is no mention anywhere of Shabuah being a international translation application. I guess there were apps back in the day. We're not familiar with them. That's the miracle. There was nothing everyone in Jerusalem, by the way, agreed upon, not among Romans, not among Greeks, and certainly not among Jews. Their history proves that Yehudim were divided among themselves. They still remain so. And it was their internal fractures which festered that brought the wrath of Rome upon Judea with Pompey's invasion in 63. The same thing occurred, was a fissure amongst Jews that caused Vespasian's assault in 67, following the revolt in 66, and again following Bar Kokhba's uprising under Akiba by Hadrian in 133 CE. So on all three occasions, what we have as absolute proof is that the Jews would have likely prevailed over the Romans had they not been a house divided. But they were always a house divided. So this idea that somewhere in the midst of this, right in the middle of this time of them constantly warring with each other and tearing each other apart, that they were unified in their antagonism towards this little cult that wouldn't even be known as Christians for a century thereafter. Again, there is no rational person that's going to buy into any of this. Well, to some extent, with progressive Jews demanding the disbandment of the democratically elected government, now of Prime Minister Netanyahu, over judicial reform, while the religious among the Haredim needing to maintain their unfair advantage and to continue to be parasites, Israel has become a divided nation. And even, if you look at all the protests in Israel, free them now at any cost, those are all liberals that are demanding that because they want to overthrow the government, and they're just using the hostages as their lever. So even during the massacre of 10/7/23, Israel was a nation divided, paralyzed. It was unable to defend itself. Now, anytime we read with the people saying, we know that the writer's sentiments are being projected on his perceived foes. An actual quote would have been attributed to a specific individual who said it to another who heard it, in addition to providing the names and conditions under which it was preserved accurately over the decades. However, the Jews would have been the most unlikely individuals to have, they would have, been the most likely individuals to know the purpose of Shabbat. It was the Greeks like Luke who were clueless as to what Shabbat represented it. And at this time, they didn't have their rabbi as the go-to answer man. As I shared in the last program earlier today's fellows, that the difference between Luke, Mark, and Peter and Paul is that Paul was trained as a rabbi. He knew the Old Testament, and it's called the Old Testament, but the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. He knew it well enough to quote mine it, and then to find ways that he could invert what God was actually saying to serve his agenda. That takes knowledge. It also takes a demonic attitude, but it does take knowledge. When you listen to what Luke and Peter and Mark came up with, you realize that without their answer man, they were really hopeless. And this cluelessness is what leads us to how terrible this text became. Now, when it comes to knowing the mind of God, there's several paths that a person can take. Some simply ignore the quest. Some are preoccupied with their mortal existence or overconfident that man is the highest form of life. Others, like the man who wrote this passage, do not know enough to draw an informed conclusion, or they are driven by their own agenda or somebody else's, in the case of Luke. And well, all of this leads to death, to the destruction of one's soul upon the completion of their mortal existence. There is a far worse fate awaiting those who promote the false notion that Pentecost celebrates the birth of a church. there is not only no mention of a church. You're a historian, Kirk. Can you hold up your fingers and tell me how many times is the church the subject of a prophecy in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms?
0.
That'd be
No.
0. Okay. How about Christian?
No.
Want to go? Want to go for Christ? Want to go for Pentecost? What could we pick here that would fit? Nothing. Yeah, there's just nothing. Hey, we can just do sign language in this show, and this will work just fine. Even today, secular and sectarians ridicule the Moed Mikre, belittling them, concealing them, corrupting them, counterfeiting them. It is why the narrow path to God remains so unpopular. This next line, and we'll wrap this up here shortly. My voice is not cooperating today. Others now, it says, others now poked fun. Oh, they were scoffing and sneering and mocking. The gall of them to scoff and mock and sneer at this drivel. Oh, can't you have some respect for fools foolishly lying about everything? Come on, guys. They were flapping their lips and they were running their mouths, saying it is because they were exceptionally full with sweet wine.
Oh, yeah.
Acts 2:13. Well, at least it wasn't vinegared wine. It was sweet wine. Now, the book of Acts has gone from addressing every ethnicity under the heavens in every language other than Hebrew to addressing down the Jews alone. And while the inconsistencies expose that this is a fraudulent portrayal, it is the relentless degradation of God's people that continues to haunt Jews today, creating the conditions necessary for the Holocaust in Roman Catholic Europe, while at the same time condemning the religion as demonic. If Luke had written about the correlation between the Torah's presentation of Shabbat and the observance of this Mikre by those who had celebrated Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, rather than spending his time trying to besmirch Jews as slanderous and demeaning, there would be a point to all of this other than, well, the point now is don't trust him. And speaking of someone who did not trust him, Shimon, misnamed Petros in this account, stood up and impeached himself, joining the nemesis, his nemesis, Paul. Now, it's interesting that they would end up painting a very similar picture, even though Paul went out of his way to condemn and demean Peter. But now Petros stood up. And by the way, when Luke is writing about Peter, he hates him. And so make no mistake, Paul despised Peter, and he despised John, and wrote exceedingly derogatory things about both of them. And so Luke, as Paul's propagandist, would have hated Peter. So he does not want to paint him in a favorable light. But to the degree that this actually was stated, we don't know if it was stated or not. My job is really just to tear it to ribbons so that we can dismiss the Christian corruptions of these things and clear the way for Jews to actually appreciate the truth. But now Petros, he stood up. I guess he's been hunkered down in the little house where everybody was filled with the Spirit up to this point, and somehow got himself in the midst of this sectarian battle between. Well, he was Jewish, and so I guess he was battling with his own people. But now Petros stood up. Now, again, Petros is the guy that the pretend Jesus, when he told, don't you tell anybody that I'm the Christ. Be serious consequences if you tell anybody that I'm the Christ. Don't ever do that under any circumstances. They take a few steps further, and then Peter allegedly says, don't you dare do this. Now, he's already given him the keys of the kingdom. And then Peter says, don't you dare fulfill the Moed Mikre. and the pretend Jesus fellow turns to him and say, "Get behind me, Satan. You have no idea what we're trying to achieve here." So that's this fellow right here, Peter, who Jesus is called Satan.
Jesus.
So Satan Peter stood up with the 11. Oh, with the 11. So that would be 12. I thought one of them was already, wasn't Judas, didn't he commit Harry Carey? I don't know how you could have 12 by this point, but nonetheless, Petros stood up with the 11, and he raised his voice and he spoke to them. Yehudim, men, and all who dwell in Jerusalem. Well, that would be a lot more than Yehudim. That'd be a hell of a lot of Romans. Listen carefully to my voice, and let this be known to you. Acts 2:14. Well, there, of course, was no Jew named Petros. It is a Greek name derived from Petra, meaning rock or stone. It was also a name of the pagan religious center where Islam's tribute to the rock god Allah was actually born, Petra.
Yeah.
Similarly, Paul, that's kind of funny, though, that is where the original Kaaba was. It was in Petra. And now the stalwart of this mocking religion is being brought to us by Petra. I guess it's another one of Satan's little jokes. Anyway, Paul similarly disowned his Hebrew name, so they had that in common. That was Shaul, not only because it was synonymous with Sheol, hell, but because of the many prophecies where he was specifically called out by name and condemned by Yahweh. And so in a religion based upon changing Dode's name and title to Iusu Christu, it only seemed natural to replace Shimon's Hebrew name, which means listen to him, to the Greek Petros for stone, because the foundation of the new religion would be built upon his legacy. Additionally, since Luke was Paul's publicist and promoter, and he realized that his mentor despised the notion of disciples and that he had not been included, Luke referred to them as the 11 rather than by this title. And I don't know if he was one of the 11 or there was 11 plus this one. I'm not sure it even matters. Further, the entire proposition was incredulous. There would have been an infinitesimal number of people in Jerusalem on this day who would have both been interested in Shabbat and not spoken Hebrew, Latin, Greek, or Aramaic. As a matter of fact, I think you could say with certainty, there was no one in Jerusalem on this day who would have paid any attention to, have any knowledge of Shabbat that didn't speak Hebrew.
Yeah.
Full stop. So this whole episode of they spoke all these language was completely bizarre. And on top of that, no one could have benefited from Shabbat that didn't also benefit from Dode's recent sacrifice on Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim. And yet Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim were not mentioned. And yet 100% of these Jews would have known all about and would have observed Passover, Matzah, and Bekurim, even if they didn't recognize that it was Dode who was fulfilling it. So that being the case, this whole story just falls apart. There's nothing that is even remotely credible about it. So there would have been no fuss, and much less everyone would have not been confused or upset, because the 100% of those who knew it was Shabbat would not have been engaged in this kind of debate. They would have been celebrating Shabbat. So this goes on to say, because they are not drunk in this manner, you suppose. For indeed, it is the 3rd hour of the day. Well, you guys ever meet an alcoholic? I've had several that I've encountered through my lifetime. Did you ever have an alcoholic say or infer, I can't be drunk because it's only the 3rd hour of the day?
Oh, they did.
No. An alcoholic is an alcoholic because they drink all the time. And so if they were really drinking and had been drunk with wine, the hour of the day wouldn't matter. Beyond that, if you go back to this time, Kirk, you like history. Was there anything that people in a city like Jerusalem could safely drink that wasn't have some alcohol in it? Isn't that the whole reason that beer and wine developed, because it killed the pathogens in the water before people learned to boil it?
Yes.
Now, it's a possibility that those who had direct access to the very opening of one of the springs on Mount Moriah would have recognized that you could drink right from it. But the fact is that people in cities prior to boiling water drank alcoholic beverages and had a very high tolerance for them. And no one is going to say, I think you're drinking alcohol, which is why everyone is hearing everyone that is speaking in their natural language, which is why the guy from Crete over here, or Arabia, is now speaking such that I understand every word of it, which is what they were claiming. You would say that would be a miracle, as opposed to say, no, everybody is drunk. And it was not the speakers who could speak every language, it's the hearers that could hear every language. So were all the hearers drunk too? And if they were drunk, how do they know what they were hearing? To the contrary, it exists as a pronouncement of the prophet Yoel. No. It's not alcohol. To the contrary, this exists as the pronouncement of the prophet Yoel. Fellas, you ever read Yoel?
Once or twice.
Yeah. What did Yoel have to say about the fulfillment of Pentecost? What did he have to say about the Holy Spirit?
Yeah.
What did he have to say about people babbling away and different languages and everybody knowing what they are saying? What do you have to say about the birth of a church? What do you have to say about Peter?
Who?
So, of course, it would be interesting to see what the prophet Yoel said, that told us that, no, this has nothing to do with the new wine. This has all to do with, yes, with whatever Yoel might have said. So the moral of the story is that while intoxication may have contributed to the babble, being drunk was not possible because the day was still young. Therefore, there was an entirely better explanation for what they were witnessing, which could be found not in a bottle, but completely misrepresenting a prophecy presented by Joel. Correcting the record, Shabbat is the pronouncement of the prophet Moshe. So if you wanted to, no, gentlemen, this is from it's Shabbat, it's Teruah, it's Pentecost, it's from the prophet Moshe. There's no other prophet that brings us the details of Shabbat. You will find Shabbat detailed in the 17th chapter of Yashayah, because Yashayah wants us to know when it is and how to celebrate it and what's occurring around it, because Yashayah is really committed to helping Yahweh's people recognize this individual called the Choder, and also providing the Choder with a textbook that he could use so that he could communicate intelligently to God's people at this time. So between those two sources, that's where you would go to learn about the fulfillment of Shabbat. Anyway, there is nothing in Yoel to explain 7 Sabbaths. It speaks of the hellish conditions that will precede Yahweh's return in 6,000 Yah to fulfill Yom Kippurim. Therefore, if Shimon cited it as a retort to those supposedly Jewish cynics, he was out of his ever-loving mind. It was the wrong moed and the wrong time, and Luke arbitrarily attributed this mistake to him. He demonstrated that his gospel ought not be trusted either. So, Acts 2:16 through 21 is totally and completely erroneous. according to Luke, Shimon is said to have quoted Joel 2:28 through 32. And at least that is what is recorded in Acts 2:17 through 2:21. However, since Shimon did not deliver his rebuttal in Greek, even if it occurred, but instead in Hebrew, to accurately render what the prophet wrote and what he may have said, we will need to examine it in the original language, something we'll do momentarily. Well, we'll do this maybe tomorrow in the continuation of part 26 of Qatsyr Harvest. For now, here is what the reading is in the King James Version from Peter the Rock. And it shall come to pass in the last days. Oopsie! It shall come to pass in the what?
Last days.
Last days? Oh no, 33 CE. We're 2,000 years away from the last days. We have another false prophet. And it shall come to pass in the last days, saith God, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. By the way, that word is, I'll pour out my spirit on the Bashar. And your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Wait a minute. Hey, where was there any place in the preamble to this that anybody was prophesying?
Right.
Was there any mention of people seeing visions? Were there any mention of young men or old men or of anybody dreaming?
No dreams.
So it doesn't even fit their own scenario. You'd think that if you're going to quote something and misappropriate it, you'd at least go back and copy edit the thing that you said was happening so that it would match the prophecy that you're misappropriating for it, but they didn't bother. Acts 2:17. And on my servants and on my handmaidens, I will pour out those days of my spirit, and they shall prophesy. Acts 2:18. And I will shew wonders in heaven above and signs in the earth, blood and fire and vapor and smoke. Acts 2:19. And the sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and notable day of the Lord. Acts 2:20. And it shall come to pass that whoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Acts 2:21. Was the sun darkened? No. In fact, could the sun ever be darkened on that? No. Was the moon turned to blood? No. Is the Lord called the Lord by Yoel?
No.
Yoel, by the way, means Yah is God.
Yeah.
It just as a helpful hint there. Should you prefer a more literal and accurate rendering, this is what was actually said. And it shall come to be. This is in Greek now. So I did my own translation of the Greek. I must have been crazy back in the day that I took the time to actually translate the Greek, but I did. And it shall come to be, it shall exist in identical fashion. In the final days, God, which is from Theos, says, I will pour out, I will bestow, spill, literally distributing from me my spirit, pneuma, upon all flesh, sarks, physical bodies, and corporeal, mortal, human nature. Your sons and your daughters will speak inspired utterances, will proclaim what God's once known. Your young men, your used of males between 24 and 40 years old, shall see visions with their own eyes, and your elders, your presbyterios. I knew there had to be a good Presbyterian in the story. Your old men. I always wondered why they had the signs in every city, you know.
Be careful, the Presbyterian.
For Presbyterians. Those were pedestrians, huh? Oh, I got that wrong.
One of those.
Get my English all mixed up. Your
Oh,
young men shall see visions, and your elders, your presbyterios, pedestrians, shall experience supernatural communication from God. Indeed, upon my male servants and upon my female servants, I didn't know God had male and female servants, but I guess he does. In those days, I will pour out from me my spirit, my phonoma upon them, and they will speak inspired utterances. So if they did this, what did they have to say? Why was not a word of what they were inspired to say written
yeah.
down?
Mhm.
Well, that's a fairly reasonable question, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I guess no one had opposable thumbs back in the day. Writing wasn't in the Christian parlance.
No.
And I will allow and produce wonders and miracles which foreshadow significant upcoming events in the sky above the and the signs upon the earth below, blood and fire and rising clouds of smoke. Was there any mention anywhere in the Acts story of smoke, fire, blood, an eclipse? Any one of these things that they're claiming pertain to this day. Nope, they're not drunk. This is what happened. And none of this was in their preamble explaining what happened.
No.
They don't even match their myths with their misquotations. And the sun will be changed to darkness. Oh my God. And the moon to blood before the coming of the great and brilliantly shining day of the Lord. Curios. Well, Acts 2:20. This is yet another nail in the coffin of souls clinging to the Christian New Testament. Even when the authors turned to Yahweh's prophets to steal credibility for their counterfeit, they discredited themselves. This blunder is so colossal, it's apparent that these clowns were drunk, that those reading the New Testament remain intoxicated by their delusions. The extreme events foretold in Yoel did not occur in 33 CE. There is no mention of them in any culture anywhere in the world. Not a word of this applies to this non-event. It is prophetic of the time of Israel's troubles, which will commence on May 2026 and will conclude in October of 2033. This misappropriation is so egregious. It is the great miracle of Christianity. It survived this stupidity.
Yeah.
By moronically citing what obviously did not apply, Peter not only demonstrated that he was not speaking for God, he proved that he had the mental acumen of a toad. Am I being unfair to toads? I don't know if there's a toad lobby out there. Am I going to be struck from YouTube for hate speech towards toads? Hate to see us lose our access over this toadery. This preposterous episode provides an especially poignant means to obliterate the most essential narrative in Christianity, because idiocy of this magnitude is unconscionable. And it becomes downright demonic when attributed to the foundational claim of an anti-Semitic religion hell-bent on robbing God of his credibility, Dode of his authority, and Jews of their dignity. And that is why we're here. Before demonstrating just how egregious Peter's citation of Yoel means Yahweh is God, was in this circumstance, as it robs Yahweh and his people of the Shabuah harvest to promote the myth that God participated in the verse of birth of a God-forsaken church, insistent on insulting him. Let's turn back the clock and this nightmarish plot. It was some time before Passover when Shimon Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Now, I'm going to tell you that what I'm reading here to you was actually written by Eusebius in the 4th century. But nonetheless, it was backdated to this time and put in the Codex Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, where this is the first time that this reads. It does not appear in any of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century or even early 4th century manuscripts. So it was written by Eusebius. Okay. Simon Peter said, according to Saint Eusebius, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus said to him, "Simon, son of Jonah, you are happy, 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 clap your hands, because you did not learn this from man." In other words, I didn't bother to tell you. We've been together 3 years. It's really who I am. But there was just no reason to bring you in on that. I just thought we would just camp out and sing songs together. And what the hell? I just, but I'm glad you figured it out. Nicely done there, Petros. My Father in heaven has shown this to you because, well, I didn't bother. And by the way, if he's my father, then he'd be dead. And I tell you that you are Peter. Oh, you're no longer Shimon. You are Peter. And on this rock, I will build my church. You're what? First of all, it's ecclesia in the Greek, and he didn't speak Greek. And ecclesia doesn't mean church. It can't be transliterated church, can't be translated church. It means called out. So you can't have one. The powers of hell will not be able to have power over my church. Say what? Hell only has one power. Only has one power. Hell is not Hades, which is what they wrote in the Greek here. Hell is Sheol. Sheol is a place of separation from God. It's a place of eternal incarceration. Hell's influence on anybody outside of it is zero. It's very much like a black hole. It has tremendous influence on those caught in it and that they can never escape. But anybody who is not near it is not affected by it at all. So to say that hell can't prevail over it is to say you have no clue what you're talking about. But Eusebius wasn't any brighter than Peter. I will give you the keys of the holy nation of heaven. Do you know that heaven's not a destination? It's not the home of God. It's not in the spiritual realm. And by the way, it has keys. So what would a key unlock, since it's a spiritual place? It's not a physical place. Mm-hmm. And if there were a holy nation of heaven, do you think God would have mentioned the holy nation of heaven somewhere in the Torah and prophets?
Probably, if there was.
And if it had a door with keys, do you think he would have said, "Oh, by the way, here, this is what the keys are for"? And why does he never mention anything about keys? And wouldn't the key that opens up heaven to us be the 5 terms and conditions and the resulting benefits of the covenant? Which are enabled by the first 3 Moed Mikra. Wouldn't that be the key to Shamaim? That's how we're going from earth to Shamaim on Shavuot.
Yep. Yeah.
Whatever you do not allow on earth will not be allowed in heaven. So, in other words, God in eternity in his home is going to determine what he can and cannot do based upon this man that this guy just called Satan. Yeah. So everything in heaven is going to be orchestrated by what this guy does on earth. And of course, this is the guy then the Pope set up as the first Pope, which is then to say that every Pope gets to determine what happens in heaven. No need for God. We popes, like Peter, are the ones who tell God what he's going to do in heaven. Sure. Makes sense to me. And then whatever you allow on earth will be allowed in heaven. Okay. Then with strong words, he told his followers, to tell no one that he was the Christ.
Oh,
Well, what the
why?
craziness? Oh, why do they call him Jesus Christ? Why do they call themselves Christians? Why is there a Christian church?
Why do they meet on Sunday?
How can it be if the guy that they're claiming is this Christ? Oh, by the way, can you please tell me where there is a Christ listed somewhere in the prophet's psalm? If this guy found it from the Father, it must be somewhere described there in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, right? Got to be there. Got to be really important so that you would recognize that this guy was now the living embodiment of all of those prophecies about a Christ, which, by the way, means from Kyros, which means drugged in Greek. Could you please tell me? I'd like to know where you would find a Christ in the Torah and prophets. Oh, there is none, huh?
Mm,
We have another problem, Houston.
yes.
And with strong words, he told him that, tell no one I'm the Christ. That's just Matthew 16 to 20. The entire narrative was fabricated in the 4th century to cement the authority of the Roman Catholic Church because they wanted to control everything that would happen on earth and in heaven, which is why the narrative is this way. And they wanted to dangle the keys as if they had control over somebody's eternal fate. As a result, the Christian Church placed itself in complete conflict with God, but in complete control of everyone else. But at least there were some signs and wonders because, well, the rock, he performed his first miracle. The rock did, yes. It was called self-crumbulation. I'm sure you've heard of it before. That cracks me up. Although, when these two contrived speeches are connected, it provides some affirmation that the Christian counterfeit wasn't entirely worthless because, well, it provides copious evidence to destroy their credibility, and that's always helpful.
Yeah.
The very next discussion we read, Peter took Jesus, nobody named Jesus, and well, there wasn't anybody named Jesus until the
1700.
17th century CE, away from the others and spoke sharp words to him. Okay, you've just said this guy is the Son of God. He's the great Christos. And now the next thing you do is you rebuke him. That's really smart. He spoke sharp words to him. Said, "No, Lord, this must not happen to you." Then Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are standing in my way. You are not thinking how God thinks." He just said that it was the Father in heaven that told him all of this fancy stuff, and now he's calling them Satan and saying, "You don't think like God thinks." You were thinking how man thinks, but it wasn't man that told him all of this. Matthew 16, 22 and 23. Indeed, Peter was the devil's advocate. The lies Peter sowed on this day on behalf of the adversary to legitimize the fraudulent nature of Christianity came at a horrific price. It would not be until, well, about a year ago, in the summer of 2024, that the damage would be undone, at least for those who have read Yada Yawa. Up until we announced it about a year ago, no one recognized the obvious. Shabuah, 7 Shabbats, is a Qatsyr of Bokurim and a harvest of standing grain, and it has not been fulfilled. And by hiding this reality under the false attestations in this speech, Peter and Luke precluded millions of Jews and billions of Gentiles from the opportunity to be part of Yahweh's covenant family and to come home. This is not a victimless crime, which is why we're excoriating it. Peter's crime, one aided and abetted by Luke and thus by Paul, isn't simply a mischaracterization of Shabuah's fulfillment under the misnomer Pentecost. It was a theft of souls. On behalf of the counterfeit Christ, he created a counterfeit of the promise of the Shabbat. The story underpinning the birth of the church is as faulty as the one announcing the counterfeit Messiah. but it's far worse than that. Peter and Luke muddied the water sufficiently to delay my recognition of the value of Shabbat, which, as the harvest of standing grain, exists to bring the covenant family home. Had Mike B., who is probably in the chat room, even fact checking me this evening, that I don't say anything that isn't precisely accurate. It was Mike B. as my favorite fact checker. I love the work that he does. So as I'm poking fun of it here, no, he's been my fact checker now for better part of a decade, and he is exceedingly valuable for making the books of Yada Yawa accurate. You can't write 20,000 pages with as many details as I provide and not have a fact checker. Donald Trump would have done well with one today too. I don't know why Mike doesn't apply for that job for Donald. Anyway, yeah, I guess he already has a job.
Yeah.
But Mike was the one who reminded me that 7 sevens is an ingathering of varieties of wheat. And when he said that, and it's not barley, and therefore it was not fulfilled. And it was then that my whole mindset began to shift. And as he was making that correction, and I realized, if it's wheat and Bakurim is barley, we have a problem there. Dode would not have fulfilled it. And then the next was the realization that this wasn't just a renaming of Shabbat as Pentecost. This was not a mischaracterization of a prior fulfillment. This was a complete and utter fabrication of everything. And now what we really needed to do was to throw away it all. There was no Jesus. The New Testament is a nothing but a pile of lies. Now you've got to come a long way in your understanding of God in this culture to recognize all of that. No Jesus, no Pentecost, no nothing. And now you're not trying to explain Pentecost or Shabbat being fulfilled and they misinterpreted it. You realized, no, it wasn't fulfilled. And this whole account is just nothing but rubbish. So it is as a result of that I was able to correct a previous statement, which was about 99% accurate, which said that Dode fulfilled Shabbat. The reason I say it's 99% accurate is that Shabbat is a Bakurim harvest. Shabbat is only possible to those who benefit from Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim. Had Dode not fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, there would be no Shabbat. And had I not recognized what Dode had volunteered to do in fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, and the role that I've been assigned to play to announce his return on Kippurim, and particularly the role as the Adamah Parah on Teruah, and how Teruah clearly has to take place immediately before Dode's return because of the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah, and what Yahweh does with it, and Elia does with it, that is reminiscent of what he did 2,888 years ago. It becomes obvious that Shabbat is the middle candle on that menorah for a reason, and it's the one that is set apart by 7 years from the other, which means that the Qatsyr harvest is on our immediate horizon, not in our distant past, and it will be fulfilled on the Shabbat of Shabbat, May 22nd, 2026, just 7 years prior to Dode's return with Yahweh. Fortunately, Mike's timing was perfect because I was in the midst of composing this repudiation of Pentecost at the time that he was fact-checking something I had written and a rewrite of Questioning Paul as Twistianity. I'm always kind of a book ahead of where the guys are were fact checking me and doing their edits. So by the time I had produced a mountain of evidence with the proper conclusions could now be drawn, all by translating Yahweh's words to prove it. Moreover, it still was uncomfortable accepting the responsibility for cultivating this result, especially when I had attributed it to my king, and I still do. I mean, Dode is the one who enabled it. I'm just the dancing guy on the leash there that says he's the one, and this way, go this way. I'm a herald for these events. Now I'm more than a herald come Teruah, but on Shabuah, I'm God's tour guide. The one reading the signs, saying the signs point in this way. So thankfully, we have a devoted team, and we were able to correct the presentation of the Shabuah Qatsyr and the Teruah Lakat, and time to avoid disappointing our God and our King. Otherwise, I might have prematurely directed our attention past the Shabbat harvest to the gleaning on Teruah. And if not for retranslating Yashaya 17, which was really the key text, when I got into for the rewrite of the fifth volume of Yadayawa called Qatsyr Harvest, this one here, I had to retranslate everything. I really wanted to make certain that we had this accurate, because you're making an awfully bold statement. And when you make a statement that's bold, all the pieces have to fit into place, and they all had to be accurate. And I did my homework for a matter of weeks and found out that, yes, all the pieces do fit into place. But it was this retranslation of Yeshaya 17 that just opened the floodgates of our understanding, because Yeshaya goes through the timing of the Shabuah harvest, the timing of the Teruah harvest, and speaks of them as future events, where he ties the Shabuah harvest to the dissolution of this two-state dissolution, the tearing of Israel apart, to make it exceedingly vulnerable at the beginning of the time of Jacob's troubles, where thereafter the floodgates of Muslim jihadists enter into Israel and wreak chaos upon God's people, and how this leads then to the Teruah harvest and to the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah. So at that point, all of the pieces fit together. The last important pieces of the portrait that Yahweh was painting came together, and that was really the point, fellas, where shortly after that, and we got books like this rewritten to do that. And this book doubled in length with the rewrite, because it was important not only to get it right, but to have every possible detail of it down for people to read. What happened as a result of that is Yahweh said, all right, I do want you to rebrand the books. I want you to get the lion off the top of it. I want you to put my menorah, this menorah here, on the top of these books, and I want you to rebrand them. But what I really want you to do is to stop writing and start speaking. And it was time for us to look Israel in the eye. We had done the homework. I was now as God said, you are the books, and everything that you have learned and you have translated and you have commented on, all of the insights, they're all in here. They're all in here. Share them with my people. Look them in the eye. Talk directly to them. It's time to stop writing and to start talking. And that just followed this natural course of events where we had reached this place. And it is so much more fulfilling, rewarding, encouraging to have been led by Yahweh to this place, so that we could now reach out to you and share with you all that we have learned over these 23 years. It's been this marvelous voyage. And gentlemen, you've been with me for most of this time. And
Yes.
we have learned so much together. And it's really an honor now to be in this place where we can share all of this with God's people. And knowing the end result, Yahweh has made it clear that we succeed. His people come home. It is a marvelous family reunion on Kippurim, and we're it in terms of telling God's people this. It's going to go from no one knowing to all the people Yahweh wants to know, being aware of it.
Right.
And so we are,
yeah.
by God's empowerment, exceedingly successful. So while we may at times get frustrated, and how do you, particularly on social media, which is the means to convey this message directly to God's people. That's why we're looking this camera in the eye and turning on all these lights. One day we'll even have the microphones working for you guys. And it's the reason we do this.
What do you think?
And it's the reason that God wanted us to make this change. And it's palpable. It's exciting. And it's ultimately rewarding because God has so many prophecies about what would have happened had we not engaged in this way, and what now will happen because we did. And we're going to be very much like, Dode. I mean, not to the extent Dode fulfilled Pesach Matzah Makotim, gave us eternal life, made us perfect in God's eyes, and made it possible for us to be part of his covenant family. God literally says that the covenant came into being through Dode. But it wouldn't have benefited anyone,
Right,
unless we engaged in this way.
Wow.
And so we get credit with God, really, for reintroducing his name to his people, for clearing away all this religious muck so that the truth about Dode and what he accomplished could be known, and his people could capitalize upon it. And so there would be participants in the Shabuah harvest and the Teruah gleaning, and those prepared to benefit from the Adamah Parah, such that there would be a marvelous homecoming on Yom Kippurim, and we could all live happily ever after, beginning on Sukkah. All of that is now possible, not just possible, is inevitable, because God chose to work with us in this way.
Wow.
And so that's the story.
Wow.
Well, I want to thank you guys. You've chatted my ear off, but it's been fun. I actually kind of like the gestures. Oh, we got a sign here. You have to put it right in front of your face there, Kirk, for us to be able to read it.
Okay.
But thank you very much. I'm sorry we couldn't hear your lovely voice. Oh, that's a B minus.
No, it's a frog.
I don't know what you have to do to get a good grade around here, but I want to thank you for listening. Is that like getting on a 1 to 10 scale of being an Olympic athlete? Is getting a score of 6?
6.
Listen, it actually has been fun. I have enjoyed looking at the expressions and the gestures, and I hope our family has as well. This is Family Hour. We thank you for listening. We will continue this tomorrow and every day thereafter until we have walked you through all 825 pages of Shabuah, and everything that we know about this incredible time, also about Teruah and where it leads. So thank you, gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Kevin.
To one and
I
all.
appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the end of Family Hour and the Yahweh blog, this episode of Qatsyr Harvest. Good night.
Good night. Night, Joe. I'm going to hang up now.